A feared mafia don, a man who built his empire on strategy and bloodshed, blacks out from pure exhaustion and wakes up a prisoner. His lifelong rival is getting ready to parade him around in chains for one last, public humiliation. But his enemies made a fatal mistake. They thought his capture was their victory, when really it was his final move. This is the story of how a don got himself caught on purpose just so he could burn them all. In the underworld he didn't really have a name. He had a title, the Architect. Don Elara was a ghost, a whisper in a world of loudmouthed thugs. While his rivals built empires on mountains of bodies, Elara built his on something far more dangerous: information. He had a simple belief: the loudest man in the room is always the weakest. And for 20 years he proved it time and time again. Of course there were stories. Legends told in hushed tones in the back of bars and social clubs. They'd talk about the time the Gallo twins tried to move in on his territory. There was no war, no wave of violence. Instead, one morning, every single one of their top earners woke up to find their accounts drained, their safe houses exposed, and the feds knocking on their doors. Elara hadn't fired a single shot. He'd simply found the one accountant the Gallos both trusted and underpaid, and he gave him a better offer. The Gallo empire crumbled in less than 12 hours, all undone by a spreadsheet. Then there was the Council of 5 families who decided Elara's quiet control had gone on long enough. They planned a coordinated attack, a full-scale assault. The night before it was all supposed to go down, Elara released a single, untraceable audio file to all 5 bosses at the same time. It was a recording of their secret meeting, but with one key difference. Elara's audio guys had masterfully edited it to make it sound like each boss was planning to betray the others. By sunrise, the alliance had torn itself apart in a storm of paranoia and backstabbing. Elara watched it all from a distance, calmly sipping his morning espresso. He didn't create chaos, he just aimed it. His reputation was his greatest weapon. He was a master of psychological warfare, a grandmaster playing chess while everyone else was flipping the board over. He knew their fears, their weaknesses, and all their secrets. And it was this reputation for being an untouchable genius that made what happened next so hard to believe. The rain was coming down in blinding sheets, turning the winding coastal highway into a slick, black mirror. Inside his armored sedan, Don Elara felt the weight of 3 sleepless nights pressing down on him. A deal down south had gone sideways, not because of an enemy but because a partner got greedy. It needed his personal touch, which meant a long, draining negotiation that was more about managing egos than making threats. He was alone. It was a rule he rarely broke, but he'd insisted this time. The long drive was supposed to clear his head. Instead, the hypnotic rhythm of the windshield wipers and the endless darkness started to blur together. His eyelids got heavy. For just a split second, his chin dipped to his chest. It was only a moment, but it was enough. The sedan drifted across the center line. The tires screamed as they left the pavement, and the car jolted violently as it sideswiped a guardrail, spinning once before coming to a sickening stop in a ditch. The airbag went off with a muffled boom and then, silence. Just the hiss of the rain and the ticking of the cooling engine. And just like that, the Architect, the city's invincible puppet master, was brought down by a moment of simple human exhaustion. The god had stumbled and the wolves were watching. And that wolf had a name, Rico Falcone. If Elara was a surgeon's scalpel, Falcone was a rusty sledgehammer. He was a man of brute force and public cruelty, a relic from an older era who thought strategy was for cowards. For a decade, he'd been Elara's most vocal and most frustrated rival. You can't fight a shadow, and every move he made against Elara had just blown up in his face, leaving him weaker and more humiliated. But now his moment was here. His men had been tailing Elara for weeks, hoping for exactly this kind of mistake. They dragged the Don's unconscious body from the wreckage and brought him to Falcone's stronghold, a sprawling, defunct steel mill on the industrial edge of the city. It was a fortress of rust and concrete, a perfect monument to Falcone's own brutal style. Rico was ecstatic. He paced around Elara's limp body, which his men had chained to a chair in the middle of the main furnace room. This was more than a victory, it was a coronation. He wouldn't just kill Elara. That was too easy, too quick. He was going to break him. He was already picturing it. A public broadcast, a live stream where the whole city would watch the great Architect beg for his life. He would shatter the myth and in doing so take all the power and fear that came with it. As his men celebrated, locking down the compound and getting ready for the show, Rico Falcone truly believed he had finally won. But as Rico celebrated, he was missing one simple truth. The Don was exactly where he wanted to be. The exhaustion? That was real. The car crash? Also real. But the location, the timing, and the final outcome were all part of a plan he'd set in motion over a year ago. The men who dragged him from the car? The first two were Falcone's. But the third guy, the one who made sure Elara's head wasn't smashed against the door frame on the way out? That was his own man. His name was Sal, and he just so happened to be Falcone's head of security. A year earlier, Elara had learned that Sal's younger brother was dying, denied a life-saving treatment because his insurance, run by a Falcone front company, refused to cover it. Elara paid for the entire treatment, anonymously. 3 months later he reached out to Sal. He didn't need to threaten him or bribe him. He just asked for his loyalty. And he got it. The fortress itself was the next piece on the board. For the past 6 months, Sal had used his position to oversee a security upgrade. He'd installed a new state-of-the-art wireless lock and surveillance system. A system that had a hidden backdoor control module that only he and Elara knew about. And then there were the gifts. Lately, Elara's organization had started to look sloppy. 3 times in the last 8 months, Rico's crews had intercepted what they thought were high-value shipments from Elara's operation. Crates of premium liquor and high-end electronics. Rico saw it as a sign that Elara was losing his touch. He stored his stolen prizes in a secure warehouse connected to the steel mill. What he didn't know was that the crates were double-lined. Behind the false walls of expensive whiskey and big-screen TVs lay dozens of custom-made thermite charges, all wired to the same wireless receiver as the door locks. Elara wasn't losing shipments, he was making deliveries. Chained to the chair, Elara finally began to stir. He blinked slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dim light as Rico loomed over him, a nasty grin splitting his face. "The architect," he sneered. "Woke up in a building you didn't design. How's it feel?" Elara didn't answer. He just scanned the room, his eyes landing for a second on Sal, who stood by the main entrance, his face a perfect mask of neutrality. Rico kept mocking him, laying out his whole sick plan for public humiliation, savoring every single word. Elara let him talk. He needed Rico to feel completely, utterly in control. Finally, when Falcone paused for a breath, Elara lifted his head. His voice was quiet, raspy, but it cut right through the huge room. He looked directly at Sal. "Tell Sal," Elara said, his words perfectly clear, "the old accounts are settled." To everyone else it sounded like nonsense, the ramblings of a beaten man. But to Sal it was the signal. The final command. Sal gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. He turned, walked to a small security panel and tapped in a short code. It looked like he was just running a routine check. But across the entire compound, a silent chain reaction had begun. Thud, thud, thud. With a series of heavy, echoing slams, every single exit and entrance to the steel mill sealed shut. Hardened steel doors, part of Sal's security upgrade, slammed into place, locking Rico and his 60 men inside their own fortress. The security cameras, which should have been showing chaos, instead began looping footage from 5 minutes earlier, calm, empty hallways. Rico spun around, his grin gone. "What was that? What did you do?" he screamed at Sal. But Sal was already gone, slipping out a small maintenance door he'd conveniently left unlocked for himself. And then the second signal reached the warehouse. A deep, low hum filled the air as the thermite charges in the gift crates ignited. In seconds, the temperature inside the storage facility rocketed to over 4,000 degrees. The stolen booze and electronics vaporized. The steel shelves they were sitting on glowed white-hot, then melted into puddles. The fire, superheated and starved for air, blasted through the connecting tunnel into the main furnace room, turning the entire complex into a roaring, inescapable furnace. Panic erupted. The concrete wall started to sweat and crack from the insane heat. Rico's men screamed, trapped in a tomb of their own making, their tough guy acts melting away as they faced an enemy they couldn't possibly shoot. Through all the chaos, Sal walked calmly to Elara. He produced a key and unlocked the chains. He didn't say a word, just handed Elara a heavy coat to shield him from the scorching air and a pistol. Elara stood up, no longer a prisoner but a ghost of vengeance. He walked to the thick, reinforced glass of the control room that overlooked the furnace floor. On the other side, Rico Falcone was clawing at the sealed door, his face a mask of pure terror as the flames licked at his back. Their eyes met through the glass. There was no triumph on Elara's face, only cold, final judgment. He didn't have to say anything. Rico understood. He was never the victor. He was just a pawn who had been sacrificed. Elara turned his back on the screaming and followed Sal through a series of pre-planned service tunnels lit by the red emergency lights. They stepped out into the cool, rain-soaked night air a quarter-mile away, just as the main structure of the steel mill groaned and began to collapse in on itself, sending a massive column of fire and smoke into the night sky. The Falcone family wasn't just defeated, it was erased. Their stronghold became their tomb, and their entire empire turned to ash in a single night. There were no witnesses, no survivors, and no evidence left to find. It just became another ghost story to be told about the architect. As Don Elara stood in the rain, watching the funeral pyre he had so carefully built, the city learned a lesson it would never forget. Some men aren't most dangerous when they're free, roaming their territory like lions. They're most dangerous when you think you have them in a cage.